Yvonne asked me to do you a wee bit about the history of the building and a wee bit about the history of the shirt factory industry. And I would start telling you about 1831 and a gentleman called William Scott, and he was a weaver, and he was selling his linen over in Glasgow by going across in the Scotch boat, and he found that there was a market for shirts. So he was the first one that started selling the shirts out of the factories. Well, I say a factory, it wasn't really a factory at that stage, it was a little more than a workshop with him and his daughter. But that expanded, and by 1840 he had established his first factory at the bottom of Bennett Street. So why did the city expand so well into shirt factories? Well, because of the linen industry, you had the same sort of skills. You had people that were used to weaving, you had people that were used to spinning, and there was a lot of people initially were outworkers. They didn't work in factories, but they worked in their own homes. From the 1840s on, people got interested in Scots business, and a number of Scotsmen and Englishmen would have come over to see that there was a market opportunity. People such as William Tilley, Adam and David Hogg, Peter McIntyre, Charles Mitchell and Joseph Welch, who I'll tell you a wee bit more about later. The invention of the sewing machine allowed the process to be more mechanised, and a lot of the production was able to be located in factories. And from 1856, the big factories started to appear. In 1856, you had Tilley's and Henderson's, and in 1863, Roberts and Clare. In 1863, you then had the City factory, and then in 1872, you had Welsh Margetsons appeared here. In 1892, you had Ebrington. In 1896, Hogg and Mitchell. In 1899, the Star. In 1904, Rosemount. And in 1921, the last of the big ones was Neely and Wilkinson's on the Strand Road. At its height, there were over 40 factories in the city, and approximately 18,000 people were employed in the shirt factories. 90% of them were all women, and that, hence, the factory girls' legacy has begun. But we should also forget there were other associated industries as well. There were people in laundries, there were people making buttons, there were people making boxes that were all linked in with the shirt factory industry, and also the transport links. Without the Scotch boat, so much of the exports couldn't have happened. Now that's a bit of general history. Now a wee bit more about Welsh Margetsons. Well, Welsh Margetsons as a company was set up in London in 1841. In 1847, Joseph Welch, one of the partners, came over to Derry to do a bit of business with William Scott and actually set up his own warehouse over in the waterside. He then set up a factory in Foyle Street in 1850, and in 1855 he then settled in the city. From the 1850s on, you had the invention of steam-powered sewing machines and also the cutting knives that allowed more mechanism, and as I say, then the big factories started to grow. In 1872, Joseph Welch moved his factory to this building in Horace Street. The architect was John Guy Ferguson, and he was previously the architect of Tilley's in 1856, and then would also become the architect of the Guildhall in 1890. John Guy Ferguson was himself born in Fountain Street, which is just about 150 yards away, up into the fountain. Welsh Margetson operated here from 1872 till I think round about the late 70s, early 80s, and then it relocated in a much smaller way to Glenaden, and Glenaden itself closed in the 2000. At its heyday, it employed 850 employees and 1,000 outworkers. At times it operated under the name of Louis Philippe, and also I think later on it might have been Coates Viella as well. At one point a number of staff left here to go out to Australia to set up a Welsh Margetson factory in Australia, but again I need to do a wee bit more research on the detail on that. As far as I know, the brand still exists, and there's a type of special collar that still exists that's called the Margetson. The Glenaden factory had an archive, and this has now been put into the Tower Museum, and in the next week or so I hope to get access to some of the information and learn a bit more about the history of Welsh Margetson. Great that the building is still here. It's now occupied by Fintru, who provide back office support services to banks, and in this particular building This is their academy for training graduates to be able to offer their services. And also in the past, the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, and maybe still do, had an office here. So great to see that this is still there. So ladies and gentlemen, that's all I want to say at this point, and I'll pick up a wee bit more of the story later on.